Yes.
Call the City Council work session of October 3rd, 2018 to order at 6:05. Roll call, please.
Mayor Copeland,
Here.
James Burton,
Here.
Ken Jones is absent, Jeff Guard,
Here.
Melina Meyer,
Here.
Ann Schaefer,
Here.
David Allison,
Here.
and James Weiss is absent. That's a quorum of council.
Okay, tonight's work session topic is a 2019 budget discussion. I'll turn it over to Manager Lanning.
Okay, we're going to do much the same thing that we did 2 weeks ago relative to the budget. I have tried to clean up the colors and the numbers, and as requested in all of the line items that were either less or more, I have tried to put explanations rather than justifications, but at least explanations of what they are. Beginning again with the taxes, you can see that we reduced the sales and use taxes by $200,000, primarily due to 3.5 was pretty ambitious, and with the cap change and given the historical average, 3.3 is probably a much better number than the 3.5. The public accommodation surtax there's an error in the calculation for 18, so we corrected that. I don't know exactly what that error was, but 175 is the number, 17 on the surtax on the vehicles. You can see that 175, which is the motor vehicle fuel tax, is removed by the voters. And then the other things, I average penalties and interest. We get a document from the state in lieu of payment, tax payments. We get a number, and then the payment in lieu of tax on the other is kind of an average of the other 2 years. The rest of the categories: licenses, permits, other governmental, raw fish tax. I've talked with the state. They're pretty confident that our fish tax is going to come in pretty much like it did last year, 1.1, 1.2 million. So I would offer that 800 is a pretty good number for next year. We talked about that many times. If you go back to the 16 actual prior year, that was a 713 year, so 800 would cover that pretty well. But we can talk about that some more. My next budget, I intend to bring you a balanced budget that has where the categories are going to be that have a balanced budget, and yes?
So is this for the most part still like what was requested?
This is still what was requested. I think if you give me a few minutes to just go through some of these points again, and then I'll give you what I think the real threads are here. If you didn't have a chance to read this, these are with the explanations in it. School receipts broken up into timber receipts and school receipts, two different categories. If you go down some more, Leif, all this stuff stays pretty much the same. I think keep going. Interfund transfers in, we've dropped the allocated administrative costs. We had about 12% across the board last year. We've dropped those to 11%, trying to get to a place where that's not a terrible burden, but still provides some good income for us. The reduction in shared revenue there on the miscellaneous revenue is a reduction in shared positions and a couple other minor things. We've already abandoned the IT position sharing with CCMC and some other things, so that's partially why that revenue goes down. And then the state debt service reimbursement, even as of today at this point, at 9/26 is our current knowledge of what the state debt service reimbursement is going to be. which is $210,000 more than last year. So if you can just start sort of going down, Leif, on all of these budgets. These are not big numbers here. They are fill-ins for previously unfunded line items for going to meetings and travel and those kinds of things, underfunded things that we know that we've spent money on this year that we should have some available funding. And these are basically as requested throughout the document. Some of the questions we have, you'll see that for the stop at the city manager there, you'll see that what I've put in there is it says 2% increase. Again, reminding you that in all of the personnel categories, we have a 2% increase, but there should be plus steps in there. Some people get a 2% and they're due a step this year as well. So those things are all tied in there. We had a reduction in our workers' compensation rate, but we had a big jump in our PERS relief formula, which is a wash through. We get money for that, but you'll see those numbers are almost twice as big as they were last year on the PERS relief. So you can keep going down, keep going. In some of these, you'll see a health insurance. There are people who have chosen not to take our insurance in some of these categories where you'll see a big reduction in those. And in some of these line items, you'll see if there's an increase in the cost of salaries and wages, it's generally due to the 2% plus steps. If you see a decrease in salaries and wages, it's due to someone who has more experience moving on. We've hired somebody at a lower salary. That's why that number will be less. So I'm gonna just kind of thumb through this, give you a chance to look at this if you want to add anything. I'd like to go to the streets department. Streets is where you're going to see some, the Public Works Administration, again, that position is not being filled. My position there is we have people that can do a lot of that administrative work, and it's a lot of administrative paperwork for little projects, a lot of paperwork, little projects. And I think we have capable people to be able to do that and share some of that. If we get into the middle of the year and we find out that we absolutely need that kind of person, we can always go back and refund some of that. You're going to see in street maintenance and some of these positions going down that there's some big numbers in these. Street sweepers, insulate and heat the last 2 bays, 3 tanks of oil and rock for chip sealing. The loader has pins and bushings that need to be replaced, or we need a new loader. So you'll see some of those numbers look really big, and those are requests that have gone forward to us. It's a result of, as we've talked about many times, you can see there's a $273,000 jump in street maintenance. Pared back for a couple years in a row, sort of see the fruits of those. Now, obviously, need to talk about each one of those categories and get to the bottom of that to make sure that that's the number, but that's the trend you'll see in this initial budget. So if you go down to, keep going, yes, sir, yes, sir.
So that's basically, a lot of that's deferred maintenance that we're dealing with there, right?
Yes.
Pretty well, we just call it deferred maintenance.
Deferred maintenance and vehicle replacement. Did you?
But we're basically just trying, basically, we're just trying to catch back up to being even with Florida. We're not getting ahead, we're doing any, we're preventive maintenance for the future. This is just bringing us back up. We're paying our penance for not having
Well,
funded this for a couple of years.
I think could be characterized a number of ways. For example, if you look at the 3 tanks of oil and rock, that's not really a catch-up. That's a get us ahead, stay ahead kind of thing. The chip spreader for $22,000 is if we buy a new vehicle, which we have in another category, then we need a new spreader that goes on the rear of the dump truck. So some of this is catch-up, some of it's getting ahead, but it's still a status quo budget with a few luxuries in it. That's the way I'll characterize it.
I don't see luxuries, and I don't see maintenance that's getting us back on board. I mean, even the chip seal, we put off chip
Yeah.
sealing in any meaningful way here for a couple of years, so.
Well, we certainly did last year. I think keep going down and get to, when we get to the, we stop at Bedarkey. Bedarkey's costs overall are down, but there's a lot of personnel numbers in here that are different because we did a lot of, Susie did a bunch of reorganization here and went with folks that work across all of the areas, the pool, Bedarkey, recreation maintenance, those kinds of things, and they're all shared people. So some of these numbers are in personnel are going to be different, but she did a really good job overall of thoughtfully reducing her budget. Keep going down, and I think we'll have better programs for that effort. Ski Hill is pretty much the same. We left in a little capital money for them to build something. Non-departmental is pretty much the same. John will do a few adjustments there. The debt service is just the amortization schedule. It's just the way it comes out on a yearly basis. Now you'll see in the transfer to the capital project funds, there's $110,000 in that fund. Two things. One, to allow us to do some projects that are unanticipated during the year. We had $77,147 in that budget this year, which some of that money allowed us to pave things when we weren't prepared to pave them. We were able to take an opportunity. I was able to make some calls on opportunities about different things, and that's the idea behind that money. In addition to that, you know, our payment on Whiteshed is coming up. I think our payment next year is going to be $210 for that work, or $192, something like that. But in order to get projects like Adams Street off the ground and completed, we need a little seed money to do engineering. So that's where we put some of the seed money. When we see projects and money that's available for us, we can come to council and say, are you prepared for the long-term commitment here, like Adams Street? We're going to do this engineering up front, and then we can move forward with it. So there's some money. That's why that's included there. You can see that the CMC budget, we went down another $25,000 to $600,000 on that. Going to the 2020 plan reduction, and I'm going to say right now that I would like to have a city council meeting with the hospital board. I'd like to have a good conversation with them as soon as possible about the PERS in the future and this facilitation that we have coming up with NVE, and kind of get all of this lined out so everybody knows what's going on, what everybody's thinking. So, total, our general fund is short $369. I think without a huge effort, we can make that 369 a balanced budget and not sacrifice
Yeah.
a whole bunch.
So you made some changes to this since the last one that was.
Yeah, I constantly make changes to it, so, as I go along, so that's where we set at this moment. We're about about a 10, remember I said I thought a $10.6 million budget was kind of in our wheelhouse, both for revenue and expenditures. And you can see that this general fund revenue is about 10.7, 11.1 expenditures, so 10.7 would be pretty close to our wheelhouse at 10.6, give or take a little bit. But I think there are some, and then if you go down through the enterprise funds, all the enterprise funds had a 5% increase in their revenue. The harbor had some in critical categories that Tony wanted to have increases in, and so virtually all of these are balanced budgets at this point. They're not too far off of the expenditures from last year. Some accounting difference transferred to the water fund, that's down because we don't transfer 15,000 over now. We get actual use by the month. And so they're 23.7 up. And you can see all of the enterprise funds have a 5% increase, and they're pretty much balanced budgets at this point.
Did Odiak Camper Park have the 5% included?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Was there any capital at all, or is this just operating funds for the harbor?
If you go back to the harbor, I don't remember the
150,000.
150,000. We did the reserve fund. The depreciation hasn't been calculated in yet. And you see what happens when you depreciate in the non-cash depreciation. It looks like the harbor has an operating loss every year. And you can go through historically. I think I had a chart like that in our budget that shows all of our enterprises funds and their operating loss every year, but it's because of the depreciation. It's very much like the hospital deficit of 800,000. It's, the operating loss. It's because of things like this. Theirs is a little bit different, but nevertheless.
But depreciation is weird. It wears out.
Well, but we're doing unfunded depreciation. Yeah, we're doing unfunded depreciation except for the 150,000 transfer to the CIP. And then I gave you balances for all of those. These will all have balances at the end, and if you keep going down, you can see that they're going to be pretty much the same budget as their revenue, not too far off. Nothing really huge going on in any of these, maintaining what they have, putting away their depreciation or their CIP money. Spots are filled basically. And the explanations are there. So actually all of these are in pretty good shape. We'll clean these up and we'll make sure that they're all balanced budgets. And you can see what the expenditure's about. So here's the way because I have written down a couple of things. Here's what I think the big questions in this year's budget are. Are you okay with the 5% increase in the enterprise funds? I think the people, in those categories, they're all very simple, the rate increases, except for the harbor, which has some different categories where Tony increased the 5%. I think as we prepare this budget, that's sort of the first nod of the head that I need is yes or no to the 5%. The second one is if you're okay with us including the school resource funding at $580,000 in this budget. Absent that number, we've got a significant problem in terms of revenue and how we're gonna fill that gap. I don't think it's a stretch to say that that money is available to us. It has been reauthorized for payment. I have that from, her name is Judy Haymaker from the state, so I'm pretty confident that that money is coming. We had always talked about not including that in the formula, but I think absent a good process of finding new revenues, which we will have to go through for the next budget cycle, this is the gap filler until we get to then. So that puts us at a pretty good place. I mean, we're not too far off, and I said budgeting would be easier, and we're almost there. Next year, when the first one comes, will be a balanced budget. And then one more question for you, and that question is the E911 fund. Did you load that file?
Yep.
Okay. Councilman Allison talked about that fund and why we weren't moving forward or hadn't moved forward. Well, I'm prepared to move forward if you want to do that. I know there's some controversy around that, and we'd have to have some public outreach relative to this, but we have $65,000 in the bank, and this fund would raise, we believe, about $48,000 a year. Between the initial resources in hand and the revenue coming in, the first two things we would do, we would complete the addressing system and get the hardware installed to be able to track the calls. Each successive year would be some sort of capital project to upgrade the system and keep the system whole. You know, the point of the addressing and the 911 together is, as I've said, it's not so the 20-year veteran who's from Cordova knows where to send you to Doc Potter's house out behind the shed on so-and-so. It's the first day in dispatcher, because of the addressing and the E911 put together, can get that ambulance to the location. That's the point of those two systems together.
Talking about 48,000 annual revenue, where would that $48,000 annual revenue come from, the source?
It is a $2 a month surcharge on all hard lines and wireless lines in Cordova. And those would come from GCI, Copper Valley, and CTC.
I think you're about twice that, but
Well, I
I guess my thoughts on the 911, until we decide to do something and start showing doing something, I wouldn't want to reenact the charge until, because last time we collected money, we didn't do a damn thing with it for how many years now? And it's just sitting there.
Well,
So I think we need to show some action first. The second point is that I think the state is doing something with the 911 system, possibly statewide. I mean, that was under discussions last year that there was some discussion along those lines. So I wouldn't want to do anything until with the 911 system, we need to do addressing. Half the people in town don't know what their address is, or if they gave you an address, it would be different than what the clerk had or somebody else. So I think we need to work on that, but we need to find out where the state is at on there.
Well, I
on
think,
their 911 system.
if you're in favor as a group of going forward with this process, then we'll have to put together a plan for you with milestones. Here's the very first thing we're gonna do, here's how much it's gonna cost. We need to start collecting, this is gonna be the second thing, the third thing, and this is what your next 2 years are gonna look like. And we'll have those projects, we'll get those projects done.
I'm in favor of it if we're gonna actually do something. I don't wanna collect money just to have sitting in an account for.
Yeah, I understand.
Just as a reference point, what would approximately the total cost be to complete the addressing, at least? So we have 65,000 and then 48,000 a year potentially.
The last bid we had on that was $24,000 to do the addressing.
So do we need to, the surcharge would be then to implement the E911?
Well, there's equipment to buy, there's a whole bunch of stuff, computer stuff that has to happen, and at this immediate moment, I'm not well versed enough to tell you what the total cost of implementation would be. But if you're amenable to that direction, then as we prepare this budget, it will have a plan with it that accompanies the money to tell you what we're gonna do. And it's gonna take us some time to get that put together. So, I'm just sort of wondering, do you feel like we're on track, off track? Do we need to go somewhere else? Tell me what you're thinking in terms of the budget.
The one thing in the budget that kind of caught my attention was under the refuse department, an extra $9,000 for bear proofing. I think maybe we should put a little bit more towards bear proofing. I don't think 9,000 is gonna get us very far.
What's your bottom line, Leif?
They have like an extra,
Yes, see, we have 76,000 unaccounted for, so that would be a good place to put some more money in the bear proofing.
It'd also be nice to know how many dumpsters we have, how many residential pickups, and how many people pass the residential pickup and just bring it to the dealer themselves. That's kind of separate from the budget, but it'd be nice to have those numbers to.
I think that was in a memo that we gave some time back, but I'll track that down. I think Carol has the exact designation of all the accounts. I think the real crux of a budget, the real success of a budget is when both elected officials and managers have that little bit of discretionary money that allows them to make decisions going forward as either emergencies arise. One of the things that's going to be coming up here in this coming year is the coho. We're going through our diligence right now to, we've taken possession of it. We're going to get it winterized so that we don't have a problem. But, we have 3 interested parties in that right now. 1 in writing, 2 have verbally said that they're interested in that building. And we'll have to determine public good. So I think that's going to go relatively smoothly, but, if something goes wrong, we got to have a few bucks for that. So, yes, sir.
Do we have anywhere in this budget besides setting our raw fish tax target purposely low, where we can hope for something else to come in? That's the only thing that stuck out to me is the we're purposefully trying to plug in a lower number based on our strategic planning.
Yes.
So that if we have any money that comes in above and beyond that, we can put that hopefully back in the piggy bank or into one of these unforeseen expenses that comes up throughout the year. We have them every year. But is there anywhere else in the budget besides that?
No.
And that was not just to try to give ourselves cushion to build a cushion, it was.
No.
Try to find a happy medium, whereas fish taxes, cycling, we had something that we figured we could work from. Where I take some umbrage this time is we had agreed that we were gonna try to fund ourselves and not decide we're gonna wait for handouts from the state or the feds to operate. And that $500,000 we're talking about using in there that we don't even know if we got yet.
Well, we have it. We're gonna get it. The state has indicated to me that they're funded for 19 at 90% of the 627, which is 580, 595, something like that, but I put 580 in the budget. I know we're gonna get that. That's why I put it in here.
We're still talking about funding our budget, 5% of our budget with somebody else.
Well, I can't argue with that. We're kind of back to where we were in 2017, and I think this council, we had a little bit different year this year, but I think this council needs to sort of retrace its steps, have a conversation about the taxes, fees, and plan for 2020, which is our year, to try to be comfortable and figure out those taxes that you want to go with. And if those are going to be sin taxes, if they're going to be an excise tax, for example, if you do a building permit and you buy all your materials out of town, when you come back and you got to reconcile your building permit, you got to pay the taxes when all those materials are brought to town. There are a number of things like that that are available to us, and I have a list of those from the attorney that we can talk about, but I think that's going to take a process for us to go through rather than, even though we went through a process last time that I thought was really good and I thought it was well thought out, we're going to have to do that again. There's going to be public outreach.
Feels like to me as we're taking the path of least resistance and just pushing off our responsibilities, being good fiscal managers of the city. We'll spend 3 years spinning our wheels and not having accomplished anything towards trying to live off our own.
Feel free to sponsor the legislation that
I
imposes a tax, if that's what you're thinking of.
Well, I mean, it takes, I have no problem doing that.
Oh, okay.
But
I'll have you write the ordinance. That'll get overturned in the election.
You know, if it were up to me, I might do something like a $600 a boat, you know, or something like that down at the harbor, and that's just a fee tax, like a harbor convenience or a harbor capital fee or something. And, you know, the big decision you have to make is, another big decision is the $5 million for the harbor repair, $5 million and $5 million match. You know, I said about how to do that. Sam and Tony are preparing a presentation for you that's going to have some different thoughts on that. I got in trouble after that meeting, so they're going to have some different thoughts for you. But that's another very serious decision in this budget. That's a long-term decision. The enterprise funds, you know, I suggested 5% a year for 5 years. And so the work isn't done yet. This is just the first salvo on that. If you do 5% a year for 5 years in all of the enterprise funds, I think you can get those pretty healthy with equipment replacement. The lacking part is still the general fund, about where our taxing authority is going to set our taxing methodology is going to be. We need to think through that.
I guess I'm still, I think we got to 10 million by not paying attention to, when we had a little extra money, we added things and we spent money, and over the last 10 years, when times were good, we just kept jacking that budget every year, and now here again, we're looking at close to $1 million more than this year, at this point, before we do any cuts. 800,000 more on the revenue and almost $1 million on the expenditures, so, I guess I'd like to see us try to hold the line a little better than adding $1 million every year to our budget. You know, at home, unless they're getting a raise every year, they're having to make ends meet, and we're just not doing that, and we're not replacing any of the old broken down stuff either, so. You know, I guess that's my off the cuff thought about the proposed budget up here is, you know, we're adding $1 million and we're not really doing much for capital in doing that, so.
I think what I'm trying to do is get you to the $10.6 million budget in good shape. It gives you an opportunity to replace some of your capital and takes care of your enterprise funds. This budget is really close to that. You know, in terms of, if you left everything in here, now, I will say that in the ideal world, when we talked about personnel numbers, our numbers were going down. We were at 58 and a half, 44 of those in the in enterprise funds or whatever, 24 in the enterprise funds. The number's gone up by 1.5. The reason that number's gone up by 1.5 and we're at 60 now is because of partly of Susie's reorganization, and we have the last police officer's position funded in this budget. That police officer's position, for example, is $110,000 to fund that position. So, you know, if you take that out,
Still not comfortable with the 10.6, I guess is,
that's too high.
I think,
Is that what you're saying?
yeah. Could be convinced otherwise.
I think the discussion we need to have, if we're not, and I'm not advocating for any position on this, but if we're not gonna adequately fund the services we supply now, and we're not ready as a community to supply the dollars it needs to maintain the infrastructure, to hold up the services we've got now, then we need to have a discussion on what services we wanna throw away, figure out how much money we're willing to spend as a community, and say, this is how much we're willing to spend, what can we buy for it? Because if we won't do it going in the door this way, then we gotta do it going in the door that way. But we're supposed to be fiscally responsible about this.
So you're saying we need another $800,000 this year to do the same services we did last year?
I'm not advocating for that in any way, shape, or form. All I'm saying is we're deferred maintaining ourselves into some future hole. We watched the state do it, and a lot of the communities do it in the 80s here. And I can see that coming down the road here with the way we're operating now. And I don't want to have to put that around anybody's neck in the future for it.
Where it's,
So when we said about the strategic plan, we talked about services and personnel as the two sides of the scale, right? So we had reduced the service and we had a certain amount of personnel. What we were hoping to do was increase services and operations, decrease personnel. And then Kenny Jones asked a question last workshop about where we were on personnel, and I think the number was 62.5 or something. And our target number for 2020 was 38, correct?
our target number was based upon the status quo of the previous budget. In other words, we were headed in the wrong direction.
It was a pretty big shift, though.
Yes.
Whatever that target number was.
Yes.
I think the number was 38, but that might be wrong too.
And those are general fund positions.
Sure. Non-exempt staff. So,
Well, exempt and non-exempt, general funds.
okay. So, are we gonna get there?
Are we gonna get to 38?
I don't know whatever the number was, I pulled that out of memory.
Yeah, I think you're,
I know that, just to save you the strain of having to answer my question, I understand it takes probably more than 38 runs. I get that, but we have a target, and I don't know if we're gonna be able to gain some efficiency there, or if that was a pie in the sky that's just not gonna be attainable. We have, take a look at this. We're halfway between when we set out that strategic plan and the 2020 budget, so we're at that point now, we're gonna have to shift our sights and our goals and figure out what we're gonna do,
yeah.
if that's not gonna work.
I think the 38 number was based upon the brutality of having a $9.8 million, $9.6 million budget. Based upon that scenario, that's where we would have to be. So we're not at 9.8 million.
Probably should. Or 10, I mean, we should probably have a smaller budget than a larger one.
I think if you took the 600 out of this budget, you'd be at 10.1 in revenues. That's where we were. We would be down 200 from the 18 projection, which would take us to 10.1. If we want to go to 10.1, and you want to give that a go for a year, then I can bring back the next cut of the budget that shows you what 10.1 looks like. But we have the ability, we really have the ability to maintain without any tax stress in terms of implementing new taxes. We're holding the line on property taxes. We're reducing the sales tax amount by $200,000, which, although discretionary, it reduces the sales tax amount. And although we are using outside sources of money, which we didn't want to do because that was sort of our capital catch-up. Sometimes you got to do for a year what you got to do for a year. And my thought is we've got some good momentum right now. Let's have a budget like this, and then let's figure out from a revenue standpoint, where do you want to go, or if you don't want to go there. If you don't want to do any taxes, then prepare another year for the 10.1. No, you're going into 2020 at 10.1.
Well, we need to figure something out, and going back to when I first started, we set a target level, it was just a dollar amount, probably $1.5 million, and we based our assessment 1.5. When I first started, it was $1.5 million revenue goal from property tax, and we set the mill rate based on the assessment values to meet that. So that's where we got those weird funky numbers, 9.37 mil, 10.37. Whatever we ended up with was to meet that goal. Now we're $2.1 million in property tax revenue. So I would love to see a different tax that took that burden down for the residents of Cordova to make living here more affordable. I would love to see something that shifted that burden and then have that, whatever money's being collected by property tax be matched in our contribution to the school like we initially set out to do, which was, if we raise 1.5 million in property tax, we give 1.5 to the school. So I would love to get back how we do it. We've got challenges. We made some attempts at that this last year and it didn't work out.
You mentioned maintaining, and it's, a maintenance budget is different than a growth budget. And I think when we started the strategic planning, council was looking at how can we grow or expand our economy so we don't have to raise taxes. If we grow business in the community, then we have a broader tax base instead of just a steeper tax bill. And it's kind of like if you were if you barely spend enough money to keep your vehicle running, keep gas in it, keep oil changed, then that's one thing. But that doesn't put you in a position to replace the vehicle at some point or buy a new vehicle to grow your business. So, over the last few years, I've heard council say, well, why isn't this wastewater project getting done? Why isn't this getting done? Why isn't this getting done? And it takes not only physical, capital, the funding, but also the human resources to do it. And when you have a human resource base that is just to keep the lights on through, that doesn't put you in a position to do the studies, do the footwork to market your Cordova Center, finish these one-off projects that are kind of outside your core business, like implementing a real aggressive maintenance and renovation and expansion plan for your harbor. So it's I think the idea of the strategic plan is to kind of look out 5 or 10 years and say what do we want to be when we grow up, and then you build the appropriate budgets and staffing levels to get you there. And I kind of feel like we're getting away from that strategic with managing the budget instead of managing the community's future. And, it was really an eye-opener in Iceland last week, and seeing how much their businesses operate from the little business level, very to the big corporate level to the government level. And I think the reason it works is because they have a plan, they have a place you want to be, and they can work together to get there. So it seems to me like you're mentioning, James, about revenue sources. This was an even year. Next year's an odd year. We've had some growth in the fisheries in terms of fish oil plants and some expansion of campus and whatnot. Those broaden the property tax base a little bit, and hopefully the revenue base. But sales tax is the other place where we really have opportunities. And we know that there are small cruise lines that are interested in coming here. We know that if we have more slips available, that boats will use them. We know that if we have places for boats to tie up, their crews can come into town and spend money. We know if you have a $10 million project or even a $400,000 highway project, you're going to have construction crews in town. They're going to be spending money and circulating money through the businesses and things. We kind of haven't had, you don't just do capital projects for economic stimulus, but if you have capital projects that are part of your plan for the future, they do help local businesses and whatnot for the short term. And I think our outlook with the state is looking a little better. Good news here tonight, and I think some of the questions should be what's his perspective on what the state budgets are going to be looking like over the next couple of years. And I think things are starting to look a little better on that side as far as the state not picking our pockets so hard. And but I think it's really going to behoove us to decide what we're going to be in terms of if we're going to really push to be a world-class fishing community, put the pieces in place to get there and have maybe even shoot towards a year-round fishing economy, because we have a lot of underutilized infrastructure, and then continue to invest and grow our tourism, which has been a growth business over the last 5 to 10 years, but between some retirements, Kathy and the chamber kind of being funded, how they've been funded in the past. I think that's something for council to maybe look at is what do you want to grow those, and what kind of investments kind of take beyond just the operational budget.
I agree with you. We're still accountable though to the community that, half of them say they want less on property tax and whatnot being collected. So there's still half of the community that has a voice that doesn't want that.
Yeah.
So it's not just up to the 7 people sitting on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Every 3 years, you get an opportunity to be uninvited here.
Exactly.
Well, everybody has been taking the read for what happened on the voters initiative to mean that we want no new taxes, period, on what's going on. And I don't think that's exactly the message the voter base was sending. I think there was a campaign waged last year that wasn't real informative. I mean, there was no community discussion on what went on. There were a couple mailers that went out to stir up the vote at key times. Smart dollars spent for their point of view, but it really did not help the city in any way, shape, or form. And I don't think that was a clear, straight message that we're not willing to fund our community. So I'm not adverse to looking at revenue sources for this.
And, you know, I'm happy to bring those anytime you want. You know, you're really in a situation where we're desperately seeking a little bit of discretionary capital money is where you're at. I mean, you can take care of your day-to-day stuff, and in that day-to-day stuff, we still get things done. You know, if you do the rings and bushings on the loader, your loader's gonna run for a number of X years. In terms of bigger projects, you know, the waste oil project, every year that goes by, you know, we have a 7-year return on investment on that. And if we'd spent the money 2 years ago, we'd already be a third of the way to the return on the investment. And you know, when you're tight like this, I understand the fear, the trepidation of spending money and reducing your funds. That would be a perfect project. Let's do that project. Let's get it on the road. You know, you're going to spend $700,000. You're going to get a return on your investment in 7 years. It's going to be done, and then it's over with. But it shows progress. I think some of the best things that happen around town, little pieces of sidewalk here and there, the one over by the Forest Service, you know, that we did a little section over there that's new just on the other side of the parking lot that just looks beautiful. Those kinds of things demonstrate progress, and, you know, having a little bit of money to do those things can make a huge difference in a community like this. So I'd take $1 million of that permanent fund, figure out what you want to spend it on, and spend $1 million and do some things, get some things rolling. Now, it's not, the message is not all bad. You guys did a good job this year. You did the comp plan, you did the build grant. Those are going to be great things. They're going to bear fruit for you in the future. And those were bold steps, and I applaud those from your end because I know those are tough things to do. Never going to make any money, never going to make any progress without spending any.
Well, in regards to the comment about the permanent fund, we had some, you know, some pretty lengthy ideas about that, you know, or lengthy discussions about our ideas on that. And, you know, one of the goals that at least a few of us had was to tighten our belts for a little while until that fund was healthy enough to produce that $1 million a year in interest, and then pull that interest money into doing exactly that, and then, you know, leaving the principal alone, and then being able to have something, you know, just, we had to wait it out a few years, but then have something that every year we could say, and hopefully we, you know, keep getting this kind of interest rates, but have something to do that kind of stuff with, not just a one-time deal, but every year.
Yeah. And that was kind of on the other side of that, what I called backdoor budgeting, not using the federal and state monies. It goes into the pool for us to use as appropriate money during the year, kind of the same thought, which. So I think what we're down to is we're, you know, need to have a serious look at revenue, see if you want to go there. I'll bring you another budget at the next meeting, and I'll be closer to a zero number there. I've got a attorney-client privilege document that I will send to you by email that you can review on taxes.
Is there any other questions, council, or comments?
And if I can remind you, we need to have a sit down with the hospital on this PERS and the future of that. The sooner we can get that, the better off we're going to be. And then I sent you an email today that talked about the facilitated meetings with NVE Agnew Beck is gonna do that one as well. You're originally gonna do that the week of November 5th, but they'd like to do it the week of October 22nd. So, we need to firm up our dates on that and see where we can be in terms of getting those, as many people there as we can. So, we'll talk about that during manager's report or any agendas.
Council, we got started about 5 minutes late on the budget discussions last year. If members of the public attended, you'd open it up for a few minutes if you want to do that for just a minute. Solicit any comments from the floor. Okay, seeing none, we'll adjourn the work session. Oh yeah, Councilman Gardner.
Just so I know I'm not flogging a dead horse and taking up time, how do any of the other council members feel about raising revenues so we're not having to play with other people's money or dip into reserves or do that just so minimal budgetary needs for this year? If I'm a lone voice, I won't beat it to death.
If you can get it out of new sources, like people that come to town for 6
That's what
months.
we tried to do last time, and we had a little fear.
I understand, but I'm still the same opinion though. I don't think we can squeeze the locals any more than we're already squeezing them. So if we can get money from those people that come and take what they want and leave, then I'm all for it. But if it's to raise more revenue from the people who are already paying it, not for that myself.
I think if we also tie it in with maybe, kind of like what you were saying with property tax for year-round residents, the state does allow an exemption up to a certain amount for a state, for year-round residents, so maybe we could tie that in. Do that at the same time we're doing another tax, people know that we're trying to take the burden off year-round residents and put it on the seasonal, something like that.
If we do that, are we just taking
Well, hopefully it won't
money
just
and
be
moving
one.
from pile A to pile B?
Maybe that would be the start, though, to get it to start to go that way, maybe, or maybe it will bounce out where we're getting a little bit more, but taking some of the burden off year round.
And psychologically, we'd all been there when we started this budgetary stuff last year. I just want to make sure I'm not going to be burning up everybody's time if I'm doing it.
Councilman Burton.
Yeah, just to answer your question, when we started this process, going through the strategic planning and talking about decreasing expenditures, increasing revenue, and being less reliant on federal and state sources, that was exactly what the goal was to reach a point of self-sustainability so that we didn't, if something came, great. If it didn't come, we'd be fine. And I'm still of that mindset.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to discussion.
I think we probably need a plan on how to get that information out to the community, though.
That's what we have now with Mitch Winter. He can do anything.
Oh, but when it's political,
No.
you guys get to pitch it,
I'm just razzing.
and we're not allowed when it's an
I'm just
election.
razzing.
We did have a community meeting last year. We had 70 or 80 people at the budget meeting where we went through the strategic plan and the philosophy behind it being self-sustainable. And so we did do that meeting, and we should have another one of those, but we tried to get the word out. We have it on the web, we had it on the website. And I think you can still watch that video,
Oh,
but
if it was YouTube, was it in there or in here?
it was in
It was
there.
in the theater.
I don't remember if we have that on YouTube.
But, you know, perfectly willing to do that again. You know, at this point, it doesn't mean that sin taxes, as you call them, or even a sales tax in the summer, doesn't mean that those aren't, in my mind, doesn't mean that those aren't local self-sustainable resources that don't necessarily impact the local person. You know, a way to get excise taxes, a way to get all that and eliminate those property taxes, reduce property taxes and eliminate that SRS funds. I'm not, you know, I'm convinced that there's a way we can do that. It takes more thought than,
Okay, we'll go ahead and adjourn the work session. I'll give us 2 minutes.